In anticipation of the Battle of Iwo Jima, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi prepared a defense that broke with Japanese military doctrine. Rather than defending the beaches, Kuribayashi devised a defense that maximized enemy attrition. The American plan of attack was made in anticipation of a standard defense. Japanese planning. Even before the fall of Saipan in June 1944, Japanese planners knew that Iwo Jima would have to be reinforced significantly if it were to be held for any length of time, and preparations were made to send sizable numbers of men and quantities of materiel to that island. In late May, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi was summoned to the office of the Prime Minister, General Hideki Tojo, and told that he had been chosen to defend Iwo Jima to the last. Kuribayashi was further apprised of the importance of this assignment when Tojo pointed out that the eyes of the entire nation were focused on the defense of Iwo Jima. Fully aware of the implications of the task, the general accepted, and by June 8, 1944, Kuribayashi was on his way to convert Iwo Jima into an impregnable fortress. When he arrived, some 80 fighter aircraft were stationed on Iwo Jima, but by early July only 4 remained. A United States Navy force then came within sight of the island and bombarded it for 2 days, destroying every building and the 4 remaining aircraft. Much to the surprise of the Japanese garrison on Iwo Jima, there was no American attempt to invade the island during the summer of 1944. There was little doubt that in time the Americans would attack, and General Kuribayashi was more determined than ever to exact the heaviest possible price for Iwo Jima. Although the lack of naval and air support meant that Iwo Jima could not hold out indefinitely against an invader with sea and air supremacy, by late July, Kuribayashi had evacuated all civilians from the island. Lieutenant General Hideyoshi Obata, commanding general of the 31st Army, early in 1944 he had been responsible for the defense of Iwo Jima prior to his return to the Marianas. Following the doctrine that an invasion had to be met practically at the water's edge, Obata had ordered the emplacement of artillery and the construction of pillboxes near the beaches. General Kuribayashi had a different strategy. Instead of attempting to hold the beaches, he planned to defend them with a sprinkling of automatic weapons and infantry. Artillery, mortars, and rockets would be emplaced on the foot and slopes of Mount Shurabachi, as well as in the high ground to the north of Chidori Airfield. The reason for Kuribayashi's departure from the water's edge defense strategy, which had been the normal practice for the Japanese Imperial Army, was that he predicted that American air and naval bombardments would destroy any defenses on the beaches. It had been used at Saipan to great losses for the Japanese. For water's edge defense to work, it needed support from the air and sea, none of which the Japanese Imperial Navy was capable of mounting at this point anymore. However, other military branches, especially the Navy, were still insistent on the water's edge defense and demanded that Kuribayashi see to it. In the end, Kuribayashi had some pillboxes built at the beach as a token measure. The pillboxes were destroyed by American bombardment. Caves, bunkers and tunnels. A prolonged defense of the island required the preparation of an extensive system of caves and tunnels, for the naval bombardment had clearly shown that surface installations could not withstand extensive shelling. To this end, mining engineers were dispatched from Japan to draw blueprints for projected underground fortifications that would consist of elaborate tunnels at varying levels to assure good ventilation and minimize the effect of bombs or shells exploding near the entrances or exits. At the same time, reinforcements were gradually beginning to reach the island. As commander of the 109th Infantry Division, General Kuribayashi decided first of all to shift the 2nd Independent Mixed Brigade, consisting of about 5,000 men under Major General Kota Osuga, from Chichi to Iwo Jima. With the fall of Saipan, 2,700 men of the 145th Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Masuo Ikeda, were diverted to Iwo Jima. These reinforcements, who reached the island during July and August 1944, brought the strength of the garrison up to approximately 12,700 men. Next came 1,233 men of the 204th Naval Construction Battalion, who quickly set to work constructing concrete pillboxes and other fortifications. On the 10th of August 1944, Rear Admiral Rinosuke Ichimaru reached Iwo Jima, shortly followed by 2,216 naval personnel, including naval aviators and ground crews. The Admiral, a renowned Japanese aviator, had been crippled in an airplane crash in the mid-20s and, ever since the outbreak of the war, had chafed under repeated rear echelon assignments. For the remainder of 1944, the construction of fortifications on Iwo also went into high gear. The Japanese were quick to discover that the black volcanic ash that existed in abundance all over the island could be converted into concrete of superior quality when mixed with cement. Pillboxes near the beaches north of Mount Shurabachi were constructed of reinforced concrete, many of them with walls 4 feet thick. At the same time, an elaborate system of caves, concrete blockhouses, and pillboxes was established. One of the results of American air attacks and naval bombardment in the early summer of 1944 had been to drive the Japanese so deep underground that, eventually, the defenses became virtually immune to air and naval bombardment, while the Japanese on Peleliu Island in the Western Carolines, also awaiting American invasion, had turned the improvement of natural caves into an art. The defenders of Iwo developed it into a science. Because of the importance of the underground positions, 25% of the garrison was detailed to tunneling. Positions constructed underground ranged in size from small caves for a few men to several underground chambers capable of holding 300 to 400 men. In order to prevent personnel from becoming trapped in any one excavation, the subterranean installations were provided with multiple entrances and exits, as well as stairways and interconnecting passageways. Special attention had to be paid to providing adequate ventilation, since sulfur fumes were present in many of the underground installations. Fortunately for the Japanese, most of the volcanic stone on Iwo was so soft that it could be cut with hand tools. General Kuribayashi established his command post in the northern part of the island, about 500 meters northeast of Kita village and south of Katano Point. This installation, 20 meters underground, consisted of caves of varying sizes, connected by 150 meters of tunnels. Here the island commander had his own war room in one of 3 small concrete enclosed chambers. The 2 similar rooms were used by the staff. Farther south on Hill 382, the second highest elevation on the island, the Japanese constructed a radio and weather station. Nearby, on an elevation just southeast of the station, an enormously large blockhouse was constructed which served as the headquarters of Colonel Chosaku Kaido, who commanded all artillery on Iwo Jima. Other hills in the northern portion of the island were tunneled out. All of these major excavations featured multiple entrances and exits and were virtually invulnerable to damage from artillery or aerial bombardment. Typical of the thoroughness employed in the construction of subterranean defenses was the main communications center south of Kita village, which was so spacious that it contained a chamber 50 meters long and 20 meters wide. This giant structure was similar in construction and thickness of walls and ceilings to General Kuribayashi's command post. A 150 meters tunnel 20 meters below the ground led into this vast subterranean chamber. Perhaps the most ambitious construction project to get underway was the creation of an underground passageway designed to link all major defense installations on the island. As projected, this passageway was to have attained a total length of almost 27 kilometers. Had it been completed, it would have linked the formidable underground installations in the northern portion of Iwo Jima with the southern part of the island, where the northern slope of Mount Shurabachi alone harbored several thousand yards of tunnels. By the time the Marines landed on Iwo Jima, more than 18 kilometers of tunnels had been completed. A supreme effort was required of the Japanese personnel engaged in the underground construction work. Aside from the heavy physical labor, the men were exposed to heat from 30 to 50 degrees Celsius, as well as sulfur fumes that forced them to wear gas masks. In numerous instances, a work detail had to be relieved after only 5 minutes. Renewed American air attacks struck the island on the 8th of December 1944 and became a daily occurrence until the actual invasion of the island. Subsequently, a large number of men had to be diverted to repairing the damaged airfields. Artillery next to arrive on Iwo Jima were artillery units and 5 anti-tank battalions. Even though numerous supply ships en route to Iwo Jima were sunk by American submarines and aircraft, substantial quantities of materiel did reach Iwo Jima during the summer and autumn of 1944. By the end of the year, General Kuribayashi had available to him 361 artillery pieces of 75 mm or larger caliber, a dozen 320 mm mortars, 65 medium and light mortars, 33 naval guns 80 mm or larger, and 94 anti-aircraft guns 75 mm or larger. In addition to this formidable array of large-caliber guns, the Iwo Jima defenses could boast more than 220 mm and 25 mm anti-aircraft guns and 69 37 mm and 47 mm anti-tank guns. The firepower of the artillery was further augmented with a variety of rockets varying from an 8-inch type that weighed 90 kilograms and could travel 2 to 3 kilometers, to a giant 250 kilograms projectile that had a range of more than 7 kilometers. Altogether, 70 rocket guns and the crews reached Iwo Jima. Tanks. In order to further strengthen the Iwo defenses, the 26th Tank Regiment, which had been stationed at Busan, Korea after extended service in Manchuria, received orders to head for Iwo Jima. The officer commanding this regiment was Lieutenant Colonel Baron Takeichi Nishi, a 1932 Olympic gold medalist. The regiment, consisting of 600 men and 28 tanks, sailed from Japan in mid-July on board the Nisumaru. On the 18th of July 1944, as the ship, sailing in a convoy, approached Chichijima, it was torpedoed by an American submarine, Uscobia. Even though only 2 members of the 26th Tank Regiment were killed, all of the regiment's 28 tanks went to the bottom of the sea. It would be December before these tanks could be replaced. The 22 tanks which finally reached Iwo Jima included medium Type 97 Kaihara and light Type 95 Hago tanks. Neither of these types were near comparable to the better armed and better armored M4 Sherman medium medium tanks fielded by the Americans. Initially, Colonel Nishi had planned to employ his armor as a type of roving fire brigade, to be committed at focal points of combat. The rugged terrain precluded such employment and, in the end, the tanks were deployed in static positions under the colonel's watchful eyes. They were either buried or the turrets were dismounted and so skillfully emplaced in the rocky ground that they were practically invisible from the air of the ground. The headquarters of the 26th Tank Regiment, which was located near the village of Mariman, was moved to the eastern part of the island when the battle began. Defense planning. While Iwo Jima was being converted into a major fortress with all possible speed, General Kuribayashi formulated his final plans for the defense of the island. This plan, which constituted a radical departure from the defensive tactics used by the Japanese earlier in the war, provided for the following major points. In order to prevent disclosing the positions to the Americans, Japanese artillery was to remain silent during the expected pre-landing bombardment. No fire would be directed against the American naval vessels. Upon landing on Iwo Jima, the Americans were not to encounter any opposition on the beaches. Once the Americans had advanced about 500 meters inland, they were to be taken under the concentrated fire of automatic weapons stationed in the vicinity of Motoyama Airfield to the north, as well as automatic weapons and artillery emplaced both on the high ground to the north of the landing beaches and Mount Shurabachi to the south. After inflicting maximum possible casualties and damage on the landing force, the artillery was to displace northward from the high ground near the Chidori Airfield. In this connection, Kuribayashi stressed once again that he planned to conduct an elastic defense designed to wear down the invasion force. Such prolonged resistance naturally required the defending force to stockpile rations and ammunition. To this end, the island commander accumulated a food reserve to last for 2.5 months, ever mindful of the fact that the trickle of supplies that was reaching Iwo Jima during the latter part of 1944 would cease altogether once the island was surrounded by a hostile naval force. During the final months of preparing Iwo Jima for the defense, General Kuribayashi saw to it that the strenuous work of building fortifications did not interfere with the training of units. As an initial step towards obtaining more time for training, he ordered work on the northernmost airfield on the island halted. In an operations order issued in early December, the island commander set the 11th of February 1945 as the target date for completion of defensive preparations and specified that personnel were to spend 70% of the time in training and 30% in construction work. Despite intermittent harassment by American submarines and aircraft, additional personnel continued to arrive on Iwo until February 1945. By the time General Kuribayashi had under his command a force totaling between 21,000 and 23,000 men, including both Army and Navy units. Lines of defense. General Kuribayashi made several changes in his basic defense plan in the months preceding the American invasion of Iwo Jima. The final strategy, which became effective in January 1945, called for the creation of strong, mutually supporting positions which were to be defended to the death. Neither large-scale counterattacks, withdrawals, nor banzai charges were contemplated. The southern portion of Iwo in the proximity of Mount Shurabachi was organized into a semi-independent defense sector. Fortifications included casemated coast artillery and automatic weapons in mutually supporting pillboxes. The narrow isthmus to the north of Shurabachi was to be defended by a small infantry force. On the other hand, this entire area was exposed to the fire of artillery, rocket rocket launch, and mortars emplaced on Shurabachi to the south and the high ground to the north. A main line of defense, consisting of mutually supporting positions in depth, extended from the northwestern part of the island to the southeast, along a general line from the cliffs to the northwest, across Motoyama Airfield No. 2 Temanami Village. For there it continued eastward to the shoreline just south of Takiwa Point. The entire line of defense was dotted with pillboxes, bunkers, and blockhouses. Colonel Nishi's mobilized tanks, carefully dug in and camouflaged, further reinforced this fortified area, whose strength was supplemented by the broken terrain. A second line of defense extended from a few hundred yards south of Katano Point at the very northern tip of Iwo across the still uncompleted Airfield No. 3 to Motoyama Village, and then to the area between Takiwa Point and the East Boat Basin. This second line contained fewer man-made fortifications, but the Japanese took maximum advantage of natural caves and other terrain features. As an additional means of protecting the two completed airfields on Iwo from direct assault, the Japanese constructed a number of anti-tank ditches near the fields and mined all natural routes of approach. When on the 2nd of January, more than a dozen B-24 Liberator bombers raided Airfield No. 1 and inflicted heavy damage, Kuribayashi diverted more than 600 men, 11 trucks, and 2 bulldozers for immediate repairs, rendering the airfield operational within only 12 hours. Eventually, 2,000 men were assigned the job of filling the bomb craters, with as many as 50 men detailed to one crater. By the end of 1944, American B-24 bombers were over Iwo Jima almost every night, and U.S. Navy carriers and cruisers frequently sortied into the Ogasawaras. On the 8th of December 1944, American aircraft dropped more than 800 tons of bombs on Iwo Jima, which did very little real damage to the island defenses, even though frequent air raids interfered with the Japanese defensive preparations and robbed the garrison of badly needed sleep. Work was not materially slowed. As early as the 5th of January 1945, Admiral Ichimaru conducted a briefing of naval personnel at his command post in which he informed them of the destruction of the Japanese fleet at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the loss of the Philippines, and the expectation that Iwo would shortly be invaded. Exactly 1 month later, Japanese radio operators on Iwo reported to the island commander that code signals of American aircraft had undergone an ominous change. On the 13th of February, a Japanese naval patrol plane spotted 170 American ships moving northwestward from Saipan. All Japanese troops in the Ogasawaras were alerted and occupied the battle positions. On Iwo Jima, preparations for the pending battle had been completed, and the defenders were ready.